Hello and welcome to an all-new episode of Anime Brain Freeze. We are your battle-scarred hosts on the stage of history.
I am John.
And I'm CC, and when there's just too much cool anime to watch, we got you covered. We will bring you all the action and drama you could ask for today. First, I will stand my ground against the Mongol Horde and review the historical war epic Angolmois, record of Mongol Invasion. Then John will take to the stage and fight on a much more theatrical battleground, literally, together with the girls of Revue Starlight.
Can't see it, but I'm doing a dramatic pose.
Good. In character. And then wrapping up the show, we shall travel to pre-World War II Japan, call upon our animal blood, and do away with some nasty vampires in Sirius the Jaeger. So grab your favorite weapons, we'll be right back. When we meet the main protagonist of Angolmois, the fallen samurai Jinzaburo Kuchi, he and a group of other exiles are making their way through a storm aboard a prisoner ship bound for the island of Tsushima. When they arrive there, only barely surviving the wild ocean, they are in for a nasty surprise. The princess of the ruling So clan, Terui, had them shipped to her island so they could help fight off an impending invasion from the formidable forces of the Mongol army. They also don't have much of a choice in the matter, because this is the only way they can escape an otherwise immediate death penalty. Jinzaburo, taking a rather fatalistic approach to the whole thing, soon becomes invested in the war efforts and the chance to stand on a meaningful battlefield once again. And after he meets an old acquaintance that guarantees him reinforcements from Kyushu, if he can manage to hold Tsushima for only 7 days, Jinzaburo picks up his sword once more to turn the terrifying odds around, stop the invasion of the island of Tsushima, and maybe even the possible downfall of the entirety of Japan. So Angolmois, record of Mongol Invasion, is based on a manga by Nanahiko Takagi. It started in 2013. There are 10 volumes at this moment, and the series is still running. And the anime is streaming on Crunchyroll currently. I think at least over here. I'm not sure if it's doing that in the US, but I watched it.
I'm pretty sure it is.
All right, I watched it on Crunchy over here. Yeah, and I was wondering because when Crunchy recently released their chart with all the different continents and what are the most watched shows and everything, I was really happy because, you know, Germany was one of the few countries where fucking Goblin Slayer wasn't the number one. I was like, hey, they're watching fucking Tensura. I'm really happy about that. And then I found out that Goblin Slayer isn't even streaming on Crunchyroll over here. So
yeah, apparently everyone over here wants to watch Goblin Slayer and nothing else according to Crunchyroll's chart.
Yeah, weird.
So,
okay.
So, you know, everyone has their own tastes.
To each their own, exactly. I won't judge anyone for that. And yeah, and Angolmois, the anime, is produced by Nazu, I don't know how it's pronounced, who have also worked on Dramatical Murder, Hamatora, a show that rings a bell, but I don't remember if I finished that show. I don't think so. But I remember that either the opening or ending were pretty damn good. That's all I remember about that show. I think it was the ending. And yeah, they also did one of your favorites, My Girlfriend is a Gal. Wait, how much did you watch of that? Like one episode? I think that wasn't one of our sneak peeks.
I think I got maybe 2 episodes in before I was thoroughly disgusted.
Mm-hmm. All right. And they are currently working on My Sister, My Writer, speaking of disgusting.
Oh my god.
And they helped out with a bunch of other stuff. Recreators, for example, to, you know, name a good show for once. Now, the animation in the show is nothing to write home about, which you would not necessarily think when watching the first episode, because that looks all pretty solid. The character models are rather sharp, and then at the end we get a really well choreographed battle scene. But starting from episode 2, it very quickly drops to a barely mediocre level. There are still some nice bits of choreography here and there, but contrary to the first episode, the animation quality is just not able to keep up. And it all looks pretty stilted, and sadly it stays that way till the end of the series. Even for the most important confrontations. And they also put this weird filter over everything that I guess is supposed to make the imagery look like crumpled paper. But to me it looked more like a dirty smear TV screen. So
yeah, I remember seeing screenshots of it, and I was like, "What is this really bad film grain effect that they're trying to go for and not really getting there?"
Yeah, I'm not a fan. Like, there is this part in the second episode where one of the characters like shows other characters this long scroll. Oh, this is like the history of my battles and everything. And I guess maybe that's what they were going for, like have this like paper scroll effect on screen, that this is just, you know, like the anime is taking place on one of those scrolls, right? It tells the history of the people. But it doesn't look good because it's a static filter. It's not like it's not like a texture that is put on the characters or on the background like individually. It's just a fucking layer on the screen, so it doesn't move with the character. It just stays the same all the time, and that way it looks like the screen is fucking smeared with grease or something. And you know, you want to always like grab a fucking tissue and some cleaning stuff and just fucking clean your screen. It's like, fuck, this looks shitty.
Man, there's some shows and some games that can pull that sort of stuff off. Like, what readily springs to mind is Valkyria Chronicles. It has that canvas texture, and it looks really good.
Yeah.
And then you see something like this, and it's like,
Yeah. Okami also really pulled this off.
That's right. Well. It did have that, too.
Yeah. So there are examples. Yes?
Wasn't there some show you watched recently that tried to do the same sort of filter over it as well? I'm struggling to remember.
Yeah, me too. I should have looked this up, and I think you asked me the same thing in the sneak peek, and I couldn't remember there. I'm sorry, guys. I think, yes, there was. I think there was, but apparently anime has some trouble with that. To realize this properly. I remember them doing something similar in Gankutsu, where the characters had like these patterns on their clothes.
Yeah.
That didn't probably move with the cloth animation because it was just a filter either laid over it or in the background and then like matted out or something. And yeah, it didn't quite work, but it looked better there, in my opinion. Just because it was just style-wise, the show had a much more artistic approach in general, or just let's say surrealist approach in general. This looks like standard anime stuff, like Angolmois does, except for that weird filter. Like it's just it doesn't fit the imagery of the show, but because everything else in that show looks just like normal. I don't want to call it generic, but you know, standard anime stuff. So this is, I don't know, it just doesn't work. That's a problem. This could be the first and final nail in the coffin for a very action-driven show like this, and for some people it definitely will be. But for some of you out there, maybe the show can offer a few redeeming factors that make it worth a watch. The most unique and interesting thing about Angolmois is obviously its setting. By the way, for those wondering what that word even means, let me quickly read the Wikipedia entry for this. The term Angolmois comes from the prophecies of Nostradamus about the reign of the great king of Angolmois, which is interpreted as being an anagram of the old French word Mongolians, and thus referring to Genghis Khan. So there you go. That's where that word is coming from, in case you were wondering.
The only other place I've ever heard Angolmois used is in the game series Wild Arms, because the king of Angolmois is always an optional boss in those games.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that. That's interesting.
And it always has some weird, grotesque, almost Lovecraftian appearance to itself. So, you know, why not?
Is that like kind of like Gilgamesh in the Final Fantasy series, maybe?
Kinda.
Okay. As previously mentioned, this show is about the invasion of Japan by the Mongols, which was attempted twice by Kublai Khan. First in 1274, which is where this show takes place, and then again in 1281. And this is a very interesting setting that I personally have not seen being used in anime before. Maybe it has been, but I'm not aware if it was in an anime before. Coincidentally, we are getting also a game for the PS4 by Sucker Punch named Ghost of Tsushima that is set in the same time and area. So it's cool that we're getting a bit of insight into this conflict, into different kinds of media, like almost at the same time. Now, as a very important disclaimer, I'm shame to say that I knew pretty much nothing about this conflict, and most of the historical stuff I will mention is from the Wikipedia entry again, so take all of this with a grain of salt. But yeah, after the invasion of Korea and turning that country into a vassal state, Kublai Khan sets his eyes on Japan. And a quick geographic lesson here, Tsushima, the island where this series takes place, is set in the very southwest of Japan, right between Kyushu and Korea. So it's a logical first step in an invasion if you attack from Korea. And yeah, this is basically what happens. The Mongol forces land on the shores of Tsushima, and Jinzaburo and his merry gang of misfits have to think of a way to fend them off and survive for 7 days. Now, it needs to be mentioned that most of the characters in the show are probably a work of fiction. The show even says so itself, that the records only speak of a bunch of exiles fighting on behalf of the Tsushima forces. But that's about it. Like, no names are mentioned or anything, or any details or whatsoever. So a lot of these characters probably didn't exist, and even those that did and get some prolific spotlight episodes, like the head of the So clan, So Sukekuni, are probably not portrayed as historically accurate as a history buff might want them to. So just be aware of this. If this is the reason why you'd be interested into picking up the show, like learning some legit historical accurate stuff about that conflict, this is probably not the place to find that. You should still turn to a book for that, as is with most, historical fiction movies and everything.
Yeah, it's kind of like saying you could get a history lesson from Dynasty Warriors and Samurai Warriors. No, you can't.
Or watching Braveheart or something like that. There are a lot of liberties taken here, and a lot of events and battles depicted in the show probably also didn't happen, or at least not happen that exact way. So yeah, keep that in mind. And yeah, this is a very action-driven, heavily dramatized, incredibly bloody hero tale with Jinzaburo as the main character that is using the real events of the Mongol invasion as a background to tell its own story. And that's fine. Jinzaburo is a cool character. He often has this great annoyed look on his face when dumb shit happens, so he's kind of relatable in that regard. He's also the character we thankfully learn the most about during the course of the show, like what his background is, where he came from, what he did before all this, what his motives for fighting are, and what kind of character deep down he is, what his ideals are, what his code is, and everything. Yeah, all of that is pretty good stuff. And he is also a real, almost unstoppable badass when it comes to actual combat. So he has that going for him as well. When it comes to the other characters, though, the show leaves a lot to be desired. Angolmois has a big cast with a lot of different factions and key players. And aside from Jinzaburo, we don't really learn anything substantial about them to really care about their fate that much. Aside from, okay, that guy or girl is not an asshole, so I hope he or she doesn't die. So, I mean, yeah. there are some background info snippets here and there, but that's about it. So I had a real trouble getting invested in anyone but the main character. I guess the other main player in the series is Princess Teruhi, who, aside from being a rather good bullfighter on the front lines, which I doubt is anywhere close to being historically accurate, if she existed at all, she doesn't get much interesting development either. She falls hard for Jinzaburo and becomes the show's hardcore tsundere character, but aside from her trying to protect her people and trying to find her place as the heir of the So clan, there is not much to her. Like, not much development, really. It's nice to see her and Jinzaburo develop a mutual respect for each other, but if you think their relationship will go anywhere further than that, you'll probably be disappointed. Like I mentioned before, this is a very violent show, so if you are a bit squeamish when it comes to blood, this series is probably not for you. Although that is sometimes pushed to such absurd heights that it becomes downright comical. There are way too many scenes with severed heads in this show. In fact, if you take a shot every time someone is handing someone else a severed head in a supposedly dramatic way, you'd probably be drunk by the end of the series if you binged it. And a thing that is interesting about the battles in that show is how the Mongol army is made up of several people from different nations and ethnicities who all have a kind of different approach to fighting. Different tactics, different strategies. different way of, forming up, teaming up, whatever, morale, which keeps encounters more varied in the show than I expected. It's also neat that this is not a completely faceless horde, which they could have done, like made them almost kind of like zombie-like. Oh my god, here's this overwhelming force of skilled fighters, right? And we have no chance and whatever. Give it more of a horror edge. But no, we get to know at least some of the commanders. Although again, not to such an extent that I could get invested into their side of the story, but still, it's better than nothing. Yeah, there's not much more to say about this show. It's tough to recommend this show like to one specific target audience. It's not really for big action fans because the action just doesn't look good most of the time. It's probably not that interesting to history fans either because it doesn't seem to try to be historically accurate. Maybe if you know your way around that conflict, it would be fun to pick out some of the real historical figures and name drops and point out the mistakes and inconsistencies, but I can't attest to that myself.
I have a friend who's a history buff, and I don't know if this show would be up his alley, but it would probably be fun to watch him be like, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is very wrong.
Yeah, maybe.
Going a little off track, when I told him about Golden Kamuy and how it takes place after the siege of Port Arthur, he was like, holy shit, no one ever talks about this. And that kind of caught his interest.
Yeah, and that's the same for this show, right? I mean, I hadn't heard, in passing, yes, but not really heard something in detail about this conflict before, right? And at least in that regard, the show gave me a bit of insight. Maybe not super historically accurate, but, at least elaborates a bit on that and what was going on at that time. So that's interesting in itself. That's a fun thing just because it's so underused. That's exactly the reason that I can think of to check out this show. And that is the combination of a cool main character and the underused historical setting. If that is enough for you, maybe give it a try, but don't expect too much. This show is very mediocre in terms of production values and everything. In terms of, writing, except for when it comes to the main character, maybe. And a lot of characters are undercooked and everything. So it's like, okay, I have seen a lot of the stuff that the show is doing better, but I have not exactly seen it done like here in that time period or that time frame or that specific conflict. So that is the more interesting thing. And also the Mongol invasion was a very long conflict with a lot of different confrontations. So maybe things will get a bit more interesting in possible later seasons if we get any. I mean, the manga is still running, so Takagi is probably trying to cover the rest of the war. I don't know if we will move to like a completely different set of characters for the next arc or what is going to happen. If we get another season of the anime, I might check it out. I wasn't impressed with this one, but I also wasn't bored. So there's enough happening all the time and, enough twists and turns that you don't necessarily see coming if you are not... And even if you are familiar with the conflict, because like I said, most of these battles that take place in the series are probably made up, at least the way they play out and everything. So yeah, it was a decent on the side thing to watch. And if that's also what you are looking for, give it a try. But, keep your expectations in check.
So, from the fields of battle, we move to the stages of battle with Stage Girls Revue Starlight. There's a bit to unpack with this, and I'm going to go into the history of certain things that laid the groundwork for this show, but we'll start off by talking a little bit about, the overarching plot, because that's just how we do. So when they were children, Karin Aijo and Hikari Kagura made a promise with each other that one day they'll stand on the same stage and they'll perform the play Starlight, which is, it's this huge play that's known all around the world. It's this tragedy. It's just, a very sort of somber but interesting piece of theater. But one day, Hikari transfers schools and moves to England. Time passes, and now the girls are 16 years old. And as a student at the Seisho Music Academy, Karen is very enthusiastic about the lessons she takes every day, holding the promise she made with Hikari close to heart. As fate would have it, they are brought together again as Hikari is transferred into the Seisho Academy, and the girls and their classmates end up competing in a mysterious series of auditions to gain acceptance into the Starlight Revue. So, this show, oh boy. No, I'm not saying oh boy because of anything bad about the show, because I'll say straight on, I enjoyed this show, but there was more behind this show than I thought. So it's based on a series of stage plays, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the conceit of Revue Starlight deals with what's called the Takarazuka Review. This is where it gets complicated before we even start talking too much about, the nitty gritty, because I feel like it merits at least talking a little bit about. I'll give CC some information to link for some light reading and some video essays that are worth watching about the Takarazuka Review. But it's basically an all-female musical performance company that was founded in 1913 in Takarazuka, which is near Osaka, by Ichizo Kobayashi of the Hankyu Railways, of all things.
Uh-huh.
Yes. And it's, again, an all-female cast, and they kind of embrace this. It's sort of like this weird mixture of musical theater that has Western overtones, but also, has deviates slightly from stuff like kabuki and no theater. They operate on this violet code, which are rules about the acceptability of anything concerning the review, and their motto is purely, righteously, beautifully.
Okay.
Yes.
It sounds almost like kind of a transformation from the motto of the Shinsengumi or something.
Yeah.
All right. Interesting.
Yeah, apparently this is kind of like a side fact, but like 90% of the review audience is female.
Mm-hmm.
And there are basically two main sort of roles that the girls play. There's Otoko Yaku, which is like they're playing a male character, like a portrayal of an ideal man or a dream lover sort of character. And the Musume Yaku, which is like pretty much everyone else playing like female characters and whatnot. There's one thing that comes up very often in the show, which is position 0, which is used in stage performances in general, not just theater. It marks the center of the stage, and in the case of the actresses, where she who is top billed, otherwise known as the top star, will stand and take a bow at the end of the performance. Top star is something that becomes important in Revue Starlight because that's the conceit of the auditions. All the girls are trying to compete to become top stars so that they can be the next the big star, baby. But Karen has an idea that why should there be only one top star? Why can't they all share the stage together? So this ideal sort of becomes this weird rebellion against the idea of the Takarazuka Review, that I get the idea that the writers were trying to, make a statement about more than anything else. The way you become a top star, you won't be a top star unless you've been performing actively for at least a decade, basically.
Whoa, okay.
And even then, your tenure as a top star could last as short as 2 years to as long as like 4 or 5 years. And then after that, you basically have no place to go. Within the purview of the Takarazuka, that is to say.
So you have to basically completely switch careers after that?
From what I could gather, pretty much. I mean, like I said, I'm going to link to more information so
Uh-huh.
everyone can, everyone else can do some more extended reading. But I found this whole thing fucking fascinating.
Yeah.
What the foundation that the show was built upon. And I mean, these things are, like I said, they are touched upon. And without this context outside of the show, I probably would have been like, oh, okay, this is the thing. But no, it goes a bit deeper, and it's fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm.
The show has a very, putting it lightly, a very whimsical feel to it. It comes out very early on that you can see the influence from shows like Utena. It's because it has the same sort of pageantry that Utena does, as well as the same not so subtle homosexual overtones.
All not bad things in general.
Which, which no, definitely
Yeah.
not. But there's a lot of jealousy between the girls, and it kind of works on several levels,
Mm.
depending on how deep you want to read into it. And it makes for some interesting friction between the characters, and it helps push the plot forward in some really neat ways. Um, Probably the big highlight of the show are the auditions themselves, because they take place on these like underground morphing stages between two of the girls at any given time, and they're a sight to see, man. Mostly because the animation in the show is headed up by Kinema Citrus, who,
Hmm.
who we've talked about, I believe, a little bit before, right?
Definitely in my review of Made in Abyss.
Okay, yeah, that's right. It's right here in my notes. Duh. They've worked on other shows like Barakamon, Black Bullet, Code Breaker, Hanasaku Iroha, Yuyushiki, Under the Dog, which is something I backed on Kickstarter and I still haven't watched. I'm so bad.
Hey, at least you backed it. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, as far as Kickstarter stuff goes, I backed that as well as the second Little Witch Academia movie, which was pretty good.
hmm
But yeah, the show was directed by Tomohiro Furukawa, who was done a lot of like assistant directorial work and episode director stuff like Red Data Girl, Yuri Kuma Arashi. So, that sort of
hmm
brings in this sort of whimsical, mystical feel again.
hmm
One Piece Film Z, and he was the action director in Symphogear.
That is a very important note, and you know
So,
immediately what you get.
yes. So you definitely see a lot of shades of that in here because, again, the action scenes are probably the standout part of the show. Mostly because the everyday life segments that come in between, they're not without value, but they're humdrum in comparison. And I don't know if I'd say they're uninteresting, but the stuff that the stuff that happens at the auditions and the stuff that relates directly to the auditions is probably the most interesting stuff.
So, do the characters, well, the characters assume a specific character in these auditions that is completely not related to their own character, or are the auditions like based on their, I don't know, like their real life experiences or something?
I mean, considering everyone has their own best friend, basically,
Mm.
and one of the big parts is, can you overcome this sort of rivalry you have with your friends
Mm.
in order to push yourself forward? And, that becomes key at several points throughout, and that really drives a lot of the auditions forward and makes them a lot more interesting to
Yeah,
watch.
sounds engaging and just a much more personal level
Yeah.
would necessarily expect. And do the auditions themselves always play out the same way? Like, do they duel with swords, or is it something else entirely? Or
Well, everyone has, their own weapon that sort of matches with their character, which is
Okay.
like Hikari has a knife, Karen has like a scimitar, a saber. There's one girl with a bow and arrows. There's one girl with I think there's one girl with like a flail. So, the battles play out, the battles, the auditions, however you feel like referring to them,
Mhm.
sort of play out differently from one to another. And it feels really cool and dynamic. And it's very, I don't know how to describe it without sounding like a broken record. Oops. Of course, you can't have a stage production without the music.
Mhm.
And it's done by a couple different people in the show. One who we've mentioned at length several times before, and his name keeps coming up, and I'm absolutely fine with that. But Tatsuya Kato,
The
who
master.
I
We
don't
teased in a
think
previous episode that we would hear from him again very soon, and promise fulfilled.
that's true. You did say that. And I don't think we need to run down the list of his credits again, but he's worked on a lot of really good, really cool stuff. And his music is just fantastic and has a lot of emotion behind it.
Is this
But
your favorite, or one of your favorites in this, from this show? One of your favorite soundtracks of his, or would you rank something else higher that you have listened to that he did, like Love, Life, or Food Was? I don't know, or something else.
man, I mean, each one of the shows he's working on has had, I feel like its own, like between this and the big three and the other big two, Food Wars and Love Live. I feel like they've each had their own individual style to sort of differentiate themselves at least a little bit. Like, Food Wars feels a lot faster and more actiony.
Hmm.
Love Lives is obviously, more idly and song and dancey. But, so is this, but in a different way. One of the other composers that worked on this as well is Yoshiaki Fujisawa, who I believe their name came up when we talked about one of your favorites, Dimension W,
Hmm.
as well as Land of the Lustrous, A Place Further Than the Universe,
Much better choice.
Vatican Miracle Examiner,
Yeah, also good choice.
and apparently they also worked on the No Game No Life movie, which I still have not watched. Needless to say, pretty much everything about this show just captivated me from top to bottom in a way I didn't expect because, on the surface level, the show, it is what it is. But once you start to sort of have even like a vague understanding of some of what the writing is trying to comment on, then it becomes like infinitely more interesting. Like, what does it mean to be a top star? Why can't you share that position with someone else? Why, why is the rise to meteoric stardom in Takarazuka Review so, like slow, but then it's just this rapid crash.
Mm.
It's fascinating to me, and I
Is-
feel like. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So would you say that to get the full extent of enjoyment out of the show, you would need to read up on that first, or is there enough in there that makes sense? Like, can you make sense of the the most integral parts of the show without knowing the background for a Takarazuka Review? Or, is this something where it's like, if you don't know anything about this, and I don't know at what point you read up on this during the course of the show, is there, is this too obtuse, too convoluted to make sense for your broad appeal anime viewer?
I mean, one of my other friends, she was watching the show around the same time I was, and I don't know if she did the same sort of reading I did, but she seemed like she enjoyed it as well. So I don't feel like you need this outside knowledge. I think it sort of enhances the experience and makes it that much more just interesting. And the way I learned about it was I forget who retweeted it, but someone retweeted this fascinating thread that sort of went over a lot of the overview stuff of Takarazuka. And from there, I sort of did some other reading, and I discovered this series of videos on YouTube. It's this channel, Nearly on Red, and this guy does this show called the Not Quite Daily Show. Um, and he went pretty in depth talking about the Takarazuka Review and a lot of its parallels to Revue Starlight, and it's fascinating. And it's definitely worth watching.
So you would recommend that people who like at least got some enjoyment from the show without knowing anything definitely like search out that additional info to get a bit more out of it?
Yeah, I think so. I think it would help contextualize some of it, and it makes it, that much more fascinating. I don't know how better to describe it, because I didn't even know this style of theater existed before watching the show, and then I started reading about it and watching these videos, and I was like, this is wild, dude.
I mean, that's cool. Like, if shows can get you interested enough to make you search out other information sources on that specific topic that the show is handling, and then eventually through the information you gather through other media, also get a more appreciation for the actual show. I mean, that's cool, and that's the right approach. Like, putting enough stuff in a show that makes it work on its own merits, but also put so much other stuff in there that opens your eyes on a lot of different on a lot of new things once you have the additional information to need to make sense of it. I think that's cool stuff. That's a cool approach, and I always like when shows do that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of the last thing that really opened my eyes on something I didn't really know about. It was, going back to a little while earlier, Golden Kamuy, because I didn't know much about the Siege of Port Arthur and that part of history, and I ended up reading a little bit on it after the show started. So never let anyone tell you otherwise, kids. That anime can be educational.
Yeah, at least they can.
At least it can give you a jumping off point.
Exactly. It can present you with an interesting topic, that is presented in a way that makes you want to learn more about it. And I guess the same counts for Angolmois. When it's like, okay, I have not heard much about this conflict, but, not only because of the show, but because out of interest, I, looked at least at a Wikipedia entry and was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. That's the way that conflict went. And, that's the thing that now, if we get another season, makes me want to watch maybe the rest of the show. It's not necessarily the show itself, because, like I said, not that well produced, but, wanting to know how they portray how that conflict plays out is maybe enough. And it's always nice when those gears connect and work together to make things more interesting. So it's cool that Revue Starlight was able to do the same for you.
Yeah, I mean, the show was really good. Its themes were really cool. It has some fun twists and turns in the story later on that I don't want to give away. one that really sort of sincerely caught me off guard. But yeah, the show is definitely worth checking out. And for anyone who feels like checking it out, it's currently streaming on Sentai Filmworks platform High Dive, and I would definitely recommend it.
The Jaegers are a group of international vampire hunters operating under the guise of the V Shipping Company, trying to sniff out and exterminate bloodsuckers all over the world. Among them are the archaeologist Professor Willard, the American-Irish muscle Fallon, the Hispanic femme fatale Dorothea, the young British violinist Philip, and our main character, the mysterious boy Yuli. When one of their big targets, the vampire Lord Kirshner, escapes from China to Japan in 1930, the gang follows his trail to Tokyo. They soon notice that the Nosferatu have set a bunch of plans into motion to bring them closer to a yet unknown goal. Their investigations lead the Jaegers to face many dangerous situations and opponents, and as the mysteries unravel, Yuli realizes that the secrets behind the vampire's machinations have a deeper connection to his own origin than he could have ever imagined. To secure the future of humanity and end the vampire race once and for all, Yuli has to accept his destiny and face the shadows of his past. So Sirius the Jaeger will start streaming on Netflix in December. It's not really out yet, only fan subs for now. And it's an anime original project by PA Works, who have worked on a buttload of stuff, especially when it comes to in-between things, in-between animation. But a show of theirs I have watched is Kanan. I kind of like that. It was nothing special, but it was alright. You watched and reviewed Sakura Quest and liked that a lot, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always got my ear to the ground when it comes to PA Works, because Sakura Quest, Shirobako, Nagiasu, I really enjoyed all of those a lot.
Shirobako probably being their biggest success up to this point. I think that show is universally loved. So.
Oh yeah, I mean, just ask Miles from Crunchyroll. He can't shut the hell up about it, and I don't blame him.
This season we got Iroduku, which...
Yeah, I mean, I will say Irozuku is like one of the most visually arresting show this season. But
Definitely.
It's kind of eh.
Yeah, it's PA Works in general does very good looking shows, and yeah, Sirius is no different. The art and animation is definitely the highlight of the series. This is a great, sometimes incredible looking show. The character models are sharp, the character designs are cool. I, for example, really liked Dorothea's design. I think it was pretty unique. The background scenery looks amazing. Even the CG is used really well. All of the basic stuff is on an incredibly high level. And then there is the action choreography, which, at least in the first 2 episodes, is fucking ridiculous. I have rarely seen such dynamic and well-staged fights in anime TV shows, and even shows that are true powerhouses in that department, like My Hero Academia, for example, to name a recent one, sometimes can't compare to that level of detail and fluidity, in my opinion. It's movie-level quality and thrilling to watch again and again. Now, just in regards to its fights, the show never looks as good again as it does in its first 2 episodes. It stays on an incredibly high level, but just in terms of how the fights are staged and in terms of choreography, that is as good as it gets, in my opinion. There's another great-looking battle right at the midpoint of the show and some sprinkled in between, but they are rather short, so the fun is over almost immediately after it starts. And I'm sad to say the final fight was a bit of a letdown for several reasons. But just in terms of, general action direction, staging, and choreography, I have very little to complain here. It all looks fantastic. And none of that is really a surprise if you have looked no further than the director of the show, which is Masahiro Ando from Bones.
Oh.
Who, aside from directing the aforementioned Kanan, Snow White with the Red Hair, which we also reviewed, and some episodes of Full Metal Alchemist, among other things, also directed the movie Sword of the Stranger, which to this day probably has the best sword fight scenes in anime, period. At least I haven't seen anything getting even close to that. It's one of my favorite anime movies, and yes, I think I think it looks fantastic. It still holds up. So if you want some impressive action beats in your show, this is definitely the man you want to put at the helm. And yeah, the action scenes in Sirius are at parts very reminiscent of Sword of the Stranger. The only difference being this is a TV show and that is a movie. It's ridiculous. Just some of the hand-to-hand combat, the way the weapons are used and everything. It's just the way the characters move in a very fluid way, up buildings and everything. It's ridiculous. And yeah, very much. If you've seen Sword of the Stranger, you will see some animation routines and character animation choreography in this that is recognizable in a very good way. So, where things get a bit iffy is the script, which was written by Keiko Koyanagi, who has written scripts for Dragon Pilot, Killing Bites, Lost Village, and he did the series composition for Regalia and this show. I think the only show in that resume that I have seen and would consider a real winner writing-wise is Fated Abyss. And that had a source manga, and they were only responsible for 2 episodes from that anime series, so... And Sirius is another problem child in terms of writing. The setup is decent enough. Like, we have a cool cast of characters, an interesting setting, threatening antagonists who are also well designed, a solid mystery in the origin of Yuli, his background story and everything, his upbringing, all of that is very important in the show later on especially. And yeah, all of that is good stuff and holds great potential. The problem is the show wastes a lot of that potential by dropping a lot of the interesting stuff on the way to the finale, or just not doing anything interesting with it at all. And the basic issue with the plot itself is that it's kind of predictable. We learn something is up with Yuli and that he's connected somehow to the plans of the vampires pretty quickly. And a lot of the later developments you can see coming a mile away. And the biggest plot development that should be a surprise gets teased too heavily pretty early on for it like to be a genuine shock when it gets revealed at the midpoint of the show. It nevertheless makes for some compelling drama and gives some genuine depth to one of the more important relationships in the show. So this was still definitely one of the high points. But aside from that, there's just too much stuff that you either see coming or that is not that super interesting or different from, stuff we have seen before in these kind of adventure anime. And it's like, okay, we're going here. Yeah, I guess that's what must happen now and everything. And it's not really like this show is is surprising you really at some point. But I still liked the way some of the relationships were handled. In general, Yuli's relationship with some of the characters and how the Jaegers interact with each other are some of the strongest stuff in the show. Especially the relationship between Yuli and Professor Willard, who is kind of like this surrogate father figure for him. And Yuli and his brother, who I guess you could consider it kind of a spoiler that he is in this show, but not really because he gets introduced at the end of the 2nd episode. So, I'll leave that in here. But yeah, those relationships are very well realized. Yuli's relationship to his brother gets much more important on later in the show, but also gets some nice background elaboration early on. And yeah, it's those 2 relationships are well realized and well written, and I have nothing to complain here. It's engaging stuff. And Yuli himself is also a cool character. He could have been like this typical, just from the setup alone, this typical mysterious, brooding emo bitch with a traumatic past, because he has a very traumatic past, who is an asshole to everyone, like, Squall. But most of the time, he is a super nice guy. With a lot of baggage, yes, but he knows who his friends are, and these relationships are important to him. And he's just a cool dude, so I liked him a lot. And I wanted to see him get out of this and succeed in everything. Sadly, a lot of the other characters fall short in terms of development and everything. Like I said, the interaction between the Jaegers is cool, and you get the feeling that even though they don't always get along, they have been working together for a while. Like, it's a really nice team feeling. Like, these characters know each other. These characters, at least to some extent, and have learned to coexist and to work with each other. And there's this kind of mutual understanding in the battles and everything. And that's I always like that, like this kind of team dynamic. And that's also in this show. So that's cool. Sadly, we learn very little about the other members aside from Professor Willard and Yuli. Like, nothing about Dorothea or Fallon really, and only a few background bits for Philip that are related to Yuli's heritage and don't really matter in the long run. Like, it's mentioned in the beginning where it's like, why, where another side character asks, why do you not like each other? And then Philip explains it, and that thing gets elaborated on later on in the course of like 2 minutes or something, and it doesn't really matter. Because they have grown past that at this point already. So it's like, okay, yeah, thanks that we now know what happened, but it didn't really matter anymore anyway. So, okay. Which is a real shame, because these all seem to be really cool and sympathetic characters. I definitely would have liked to learn more about them, or maybe get an entire episode dedicated to each of them and their backgrounds. And, where they came from and everything. But this is only like a 12 episode long show, so I guess there was no time for that. They wanted to move forward with the plot and keep these characters simple, sympathetic and relatable, but simple. And that is kind of a shame in my opinion, because, there was a lot of potential there. But I think the character they dropped the ball on the hardest is Ryoko, who is the daughter of the Baron, at whose estate the Jaegers set up camp under the guise of the shipping company and make that, their base of operations. And Ryoko is immediately smitten with Yuli, naturally. He's a young hottie. And mysterious and cool. And she immediately wants to know everything about him. And coincidentally, she is a super gifted sword fighter. So of course you expect them to set her up to become part of the team and slice some vampires in half, right? Yeah. And that is what they do. And I loved it. And she's cool and fun and funny. And she's just a great character. And then we get to that point in the show that should be her moment of badass glory, which is at the end of the first half. And she gets to do exactly nothing.
Oh, no.
And she does that for the rest of the show. Nada. She runs after Yuli like a lovesick puppy. And at the end, her biggest contribution is throwing him a sword for the final fight. She doesn't fight one of the big opponents herself, of even a single vampire. And that just pissed me off quite a lot. Like, you build up that amazing, sympathetic female badass character and then almost completely drop her by the wayside. Do nothing with her at all. Nothing interesting. She's just there from that moment on, but doesn't do anything. Doesn't contribute really. Doesn't further the character development between her and Yuli. Nothing. Nothing happens. That relationship doesn't progress. Stays on the same level. And she doesn't do anything in terms of the fights and everything. She doesn't go through another arc or anything. Nothing. She's just there. And that's just like, what the fuck? How could you waste her so hard? Like, that is, oh my god, holy shit, that was such a disappointment. I had high hopes for that character, and she was written so well in the beginning, or developed so well in the beginning, and so sympathetic. And it's like, I mean, she stays sympathetic, but there's just nothing else to her at that point. And I guess a lot of that results from the second half of the show being even more focused on Yuli and trying to bring the plot to a conclusion. But the problem is, like I said before, where the plot goes is not really engaging. It's basically this prolonged chase for a MacGuffin called the Arc of the Sirius. And some of the stuff about Yuli's past is interesting, just in regard to his own character development. But it leaves the rest of the cast with very little to do. And Yuli teams up with an entirely new character that we also don't learn that much about until the very end, which again takes away from the development and screen time of the other characters that I cared much more about at this point. So I was like, what the fuck is that character doing here? Why couldn't one of the other characters like fill in his part? And I guess there was some reason to it by the end, but still doesn't justify it. It just feels like a completely useless character addition that further increases the cast, but doesn't add anything worthwhile in terms of character development and everything. And it takes away from the other characters. Things like that make the second half of the show feel really undercooked and a bit improvised, like they were making shit up as they went with every new episode. Didn't really know where they were going with this, which sometimes happens with anime original stuff. And maybe that's what happened here. Like, characters unnecessarily jump between locations, different factions going somewhere, not really achieving anything relevant. Like, why are you here now? What are you doing there? That wasn't necessarily at all. That didn't lead to anything. Nothing is really happening. It all feels a bit hastily patched together. Like many 12-episode series, this definitely would have profited from a longer runtime, I think, and some more thought put into the roles of the different characters, what their part should have been in the final confrontation and everything. And at this point, many of them have no important role at all, which bummed me out because I like those characters. And, they just don't do anything interesting with a lot of them. And like I said, the final fight is underwhelming too. The final boss, so to speak, looks really lame. It's like, he was cool before, and it was like, okay, now let's get going with this. When the final battle starts, let's get cracking. And then he yeah, he transforms and looks really dumb and stupid. And I'm like, oh, god damn it.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and the fight is not as interestingly staged or choreographed as some of the others. Yeah, so that was also a bit underwhelming. At least we get two of the best characters teaming up, so that was something that made me happy. But yeah, it feels like from the midpoint on, the show just spiraled steadily downward. Like it's just this decline into mediocrity. Not visual-wise, don't get me wrong, it keeps on looking amazing, but it's like the plot just feels like it's just tumbling, slowly driving off the road, doesn't really know where it's going, and falls apart on the way down, like exploding, like turning into this fiery wreck. I don't know.
God damn.
It's yeah, it's a letdown. It's a letdown. And I can't say that the series doesn't have a conclusion. It definitely does, and it feels like, okay, this is the logical conclusion, but it feels like we're missing some steps in between, or there could have been a different, more interesting solution to all of this. Like, it's like, okay, this is really all you were going for with this? This is really not special or interesting. And why did you waste so much time on searching for that one specific thing? And why is that what you wanted to do at the end of the show? And yeah, it feels like if they had more time, maybe the show could have been more interesting. They could have developed the characters further, and maybe they would have had more time to, lead the story and the plot, and what Yuli eventually has to do and everything. Yeah, and the fate of the vampires and all of that would have led to a much more interesting conclusion than what it eventually got. So yeah, Sirius the Jaeger could have been a really good series. The potential is there, definitely, in the story and in the characters. But after a very strong start, the show just kind of peters out. It's almost never boring per se, I would say, though some of the parts of the hunt for the Ark of the Covenant Sirius drag a bit. But at that point, you start to see where the show is going, and you realize that you probably won't end up in a satisfying place, and that's what happens, and that's a shame. And yeah, I'd say if you love action, give it a watch. The amazing fights are worth it. The art is great. The character designs, like I said, and in the beginning, you get to spend at least enough time with the characters to like them and to want to see more of them. And maybe if you like, Yuli, stick with it till the end, because he is still probably the best character in this. Maybe that will be enough for you to walk away from the show happier than I did. I don't know. But I ended up feeling a bit underwhelmed and disappointed by this initially very promising show. And that is a wrap on the 62nd episode of Anime Brain Freeze. All the music in our show is from the Double Dragon Neon soundtrack by the amazing Jake Kaufman. Please go to via.bandcamp.com and check out his awesome work. Our show is available on most of the popular podcast services, but it's always worth visiting animebrainfreeze.com for our review index and some interesting articles linked in our episode release posts. Follow us on Twitter at AnyBrainFreeze. We tweet regular updates and fun anime-related stuff there. Leave us comments and questions on Facebook and our YouTube channel, or send an email to animebrainfreeze@gmail.com. We would love to read your feedback. Thanks for tuning in, we hope you had a good time, and please join us again on our next show. Macht's gut!
So long, everybody. Next time on Anime Brain Freeze.
The return of Skeletor and his merry menagerie of monstrous miscreants.
And my commute to school was never like this.